Hi everybody, my name is Aoudi. This is video number 7 in the Kali Linux Security Tools series. In today's demo, we have 3 SMB analysis tools. So I really feel I must talk a little about SMB before I start this demo. So what is SMB? SMB stands for the Server Message Block, which is a client-server protocol for sharing and accessing files, printers, and other resources on a network. So SMB simply enables us to access files and connect to resources like printers on remote hosts. When SMB runs on top of NetBIOS or the Network Basic Input-Output System over TCP/IP or simply just NBT, it uses ports 137, 138, and 139. So remember those ports when we do our port scanning. Now, it's very common to see these days SMB running on port 45. In terms of security, SMB version 1.0 was exploited with the very famous or infamous WannaCry ransomware. From SMB 3.0 and later, the protocol became more secure with added features like end-to-end data encryption as an example. But what is Samba? Samba is an open source implementation of the SMB protocol for Unix systems and Linux distributions. The Samba platform includes a server that enables different client types to access the different SMB resources. With that out of the way, I think we're ready for the demo. So let us start. Okay, so I have my Kali Linux and I have my 2 targets and I'm ready to start. Here are my 3 tools. Always start with the help system and try to find if there are manual pages for them. The plan for today is to start with Nbtscan, scan the entire network to see what SMB resources we can discover. We will then use Smb Map, and finally, the more interesting of the 3, we will use enum for Linux to really enumerate so much information from our targets. But before, I'm gonna run a quick Nmap network scan, actually port scan, to discover the ports that I just mentioned. I'm using the SV option to enumerate running services and the versions of these running services. So this is one of my targets, and as you can see, port 139 and port 445 are both open with running services. The Samba with version 3.x to 4.x, so it seems Nmap is not very sure. Let's see if we can get more interesting information later using our SMB tools. This is my other target and I have port 139 open, Windows NetBIOS SSN, and also port 445. So our first tool, Nbtscan, scan networks for NetBIOS information, and I will do just that. I will use the range option and try to get the NetBIOS table as in the example shown here. So as you can see, these are my 2 targets and I have the NetBIOS name and the MAC address. I rescan the network using the V option for verbose to get the NetBIOS table. You can use a NetBIOS lookup table to find out these codes, what they mean. So for example, it can be a workstation name and something can be unique to that workstation or that host, or it can be group, which is, let's say, for a domain. Maybe I'll show you that a little later. Next is SMB Map. It's an SMB enumeration tool. So I will use the H option to specify an IP address of one of my hosts. I got more interesting results from the second target, which is running the Samba server. And you can see here I got some default shares. For example, the temp, the IPC, which is the inter-process communication, network share. You can see some permissions and comments as well. Now let's get to our last tool, which is by far more interesting than the first two. You can see here some enumeration options. So for example, to get user list, machine list, shares, printers, and so on. You can, if you manage to enumerate the username and password, you can use it in the command. But I will be using the A option right here, which basically does almost all of the above. There are no manual pages for enum for Linux. So we are ready to proceed. This is interesting. It's an error, and basically it says the server doesn't allow session using username, password, and therefore it's aborting the remainder of the test, and there would be a lot more tests, so we need to resolve this error. Now I've seen this error before, and basically it relates to the default minimum protocol that is set on the client, and we need to change that in the Samba configuration file. So let's do that together. I open this folder as root to be able to make changes to the configuration file. So this is what I need to add, is to say to override the default value of the minimum client protocol. We will set it to NT1. We will try to rerun. And as you can see, I didn't get that error, but also I didn't get a lot of information here. I should be able to see more if, for example, I have the Samba server as in the case of my second target. So I'm going to try the same on the second target and explain some of the results over there. As you can see, it is a lot more interesting. So let's see the output and try to make sense of it. So first, it got some target information, IP address. This is the relative ID range. Basically, this refers to users. So there is the security ID or the SID. And the last part of it, you have the domain stuff, and then the last part of the SID is the RID range. So this is the default that SMB enum for Linux will use, and we can override this value if we want. The default username password will be empty, and these are some known usernames. This is the domain, which is workgroup. And this is the net bias table. So as you can see, MBT stat information. Again, we can see the net bias name, the code, and whether it's unique or group, whether it's active or not. And we can see things like a file server, for instance. So the server allows us to use username, password, empty in this case because we didn't enumerate them, we don't know them. Operating system information, as you can see, with the NetBIOS name or the host name of the machine, Metasploitable, and the Samba version. Remember when we used Nmap with the SV option, we got 3.x to 4.x, so Nmap wasn't really sure. Here, Enum for Linux was able to get us the exact version of the Samba server. If you use the U option, the capital U option, basically it would be doing this part, which is to enumerate the users. And if you're familiar with Metasploit, you know that there is the administrator and there is MSF admin, and we should be able to see it here somewhere. There it is. These are the shares that I think we saw in using SMB Map. Now this is the password policy. It's interesting. Again, we got a lot of useful information here. If there is a password policy enforced, what is it? So this would allow us to really perform better brute force attacks on these passwords if we know what's the minimum length, if it's enforced, if it has to be changed, and so on. Again, reference to SID and RIDs, so it uses a certain range from 500 to 550 and then from 1000 to 1050. So this, for example, would be at the end, the 500 would be the RID or the relative ID, and basically with the S1521 and 500, this is the administrator. Of course, you can look up these numbers and what they mean in order to understand better. Okay, this is it for the demo. Let me show you that NetBIOS table that I talked about. So as you can see, this is the NetBIOS table, the NetBIOS service codes actually, and you can see here a name like computer name, with a code 00 and a type unique. That would be a workstation service. So basically it's the unique name of a workstation. But when we see, for example, with code 20, which is also unique, that would be the file server service. Sometimes we see G for group. That would be something that belongs to the domain. So that is the entry in the NetBIOS table for the domain name. This is it for this demo. I just demonstrated 3 SMB analysis tools, so thank you for watching. If you find these videos useful, you know what to do.